So thank you very much for having me here. Indeed, I am Isabel Ladrón Arroyo, and I come from the European Commission, specifically from the Directorate General in charge of Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. So basically the part of the EU that deals with social and employment policy. And I'm the one responsible for micro-credentials. So that introduction is already, I think, important to explain how the EU is putting vocational education and training, that is the unit where I work in, and micro-credentials, not only in the education part, in the DG for EAC, right, that is for education and culture, but also in employment. So that already says a lot about this EU approach of like the relevance of micro-credentials for the labor market. Like, do I have my presentation or how? Thank you. Yes, so what I will do in between the presentation, I can already like introduce it a bit. What I will do before talking about specifically the EU approach and where are we now, as Anthony explained, I would like to explain a little bit in a broader way the context of like EU skills development policy in the EU. So how important is for the EU this idea of like engaging in lifelong learning and upskilling and reskilling. And I think that that will be important to understand a little bit where I'm now in terms of micro-credentials. The format.
Isabel, you have to do a little dance and entertain us a bit while I done.
No problem. I admit it was my fault. I uploaded last minute, so.
It's here. We're making it work.
Yeah.
Technology, it's all working.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Perfect. So, thank you very much. So this is a bit what I was explaining, right? Like I will go first to this broader context of like a skills development policy in the EU, and I will need to talk about the Union of Skills, that maybe you heard about it. It was recently launched, but I will explain it nicely. Then I would like to pass and to explain a bit like what's the point of the EU approach and where are we now. And finally, I wanted to put the last part in which instead of stating something, I'm happy to raise a question that I think is a question overall for the conference, but I think it could be like as a nice introduction for this keynote speech to see what else is needed, right? So I can propose from my part, from the Commission part, how do we see things, how do we like try to understand every stakeholder, but actually this event is a great opportunity to have a listening space so that the Commission can also listen to your needs and listen to your ideas and see indeed what else is possible to do, and also beyond possible, like is needed, right? And then let's figure it out from where the solution or how the solution comes. So, first of all, to bring some context on the ambition of the EU regarding skills development. Maybe you heard about the Porto social targets, in which one of them, there are three, so one of them is related to education and training. And the idea is that by 2030, the EU wants to have at least 60% of adult education participating in training every year. This is the idea of mainstreaming lifelong learning, right? It's not that, as it was very well explained before in the introduction, actually, that people don't just go to university when they are young or like to vet, to vocational education and training, and then you go to work and that's it, but that you are constantly upskilling and reskilling. So this 60% is like participating in training every year. That's a bit the thing. At the moment, we are far from this target at an EU level, like we are around like 40%, 40-something. But above all, the thing is that there is like big discrepancies across member states. So for some member states, they are way more advanced than for others. So here, like that's a big target, where to put resources and energy in. And then there are other targets that are related to digital skills specifically, but it's still very important. The first one, like the second one here, has to do with basic digital skills. So the idea is that 80% of population in the EU has at least basic digital skills, which is fundamental for the labor market, but not only. It's also fundamental for social inclusion, because the more and more services, also access to public administration, but imagine like online banking and whatnot, has a digital component. So imagine the risk of leaving people behind when you don't have at least these basic digital skills to participate in society and of course in the labor market. And the third objective related to skill is maybe more related to the idea of like EU competitiveness, that now it's all over, right? And is that we need people with advanced digital skills, like ICT specialists. And here the figure is expressed in terms of absolute number. So the EU needs at least 20 million ICT specialists, and important to that as well is that it has a big component of gender convergence, because many times, like like women are underrepresented in these STEM professions, while there is a big market demand for that. So it's like a missed opportunity actually to equal working conditions and to raise quality jobs for women, and also for the market to have enough people to work on that, because there is a global competition for this specific talent. So this is a bit what the EU have in mind in terms of ambition, and for you to see a little bit the record and where are we going, one can state that there is a new political push for skills development. So we had at a framework, at a 5 years framework, the skills agenda from 2020 to 2025. Here, the main goal was to mainstream a mindset of lifelong learning. So exactly what it was being explained before, right? Is that it should be in every people's life, in every people's mind, that it is normal to be constantly upskilling and reskilling, adapting to societal and to labor market needs. Then last year, we had the European Year of Skill. That was as well like a communication boost, so to speak, like a way to put in the focus like this importance for skills. And now we've went to a further step, like this new political push, as I'm saying, like something bolder, something stronger, that is called the Union of Skills. It has taken so far the shape of a communication that was launched in March, like this month, the 5th of March, I think it was launched. And I won't go in detail on it, but I think it was very important for you to see a little bit where micro-credentials are playing within this biggest EU policy, right? So just to read literally like the words by the Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, in the political guidelines for the next European Commission until 2029, right? It was written, Europe needs a radical step change in ambition and action. So these are keywords, right? Like we are talking now, we have to go farther than what we've gone until now on that. For all skills levels and for all types of training and education. And that's important for people's career and prospects as it is for Europe's competitiveness. And to do so, we will establish a union of skills. That this is what I've been explaining now. And just also to drop another like sign of like how this is being super relevant. The commissioner that takes care of like employment, social and education policies is now an executive vice president. That means that is like a bit of a special commissioner, right? Like someone a bit higher. And in her very title of Roxana Mințatu, that is the commissioner, the executive vice president, is executive vice presidents for social rights, skills, quality jobs, and preparedness. So skills is in the title of an executive vice president at the EU level. Just to say like how high in the agenda it is. So it is the momentum for micro-credentials, and I think that we all in this room that we work around this topic, is super important that we have this message like clear, and it's actually encouraging, like if we will find political support ever to do our business, like the moment is now. So that's basically like the rationale behind the Union of Skills. Like I guess that's familiar for all of us, right? Like that there is skill shortages and gaps in Europe, and we cannot afford like to miss workforce in a time of like labor shortages, right? So that's also like these two words are very important. Like there is not enough skilled workers, both in terms of like quality, for example, with this whole digital skills, right? Like we need certain like type of skills, but also in terms of quantity, like most of labor shortages are driven by demographic change. So it is a matter of like there is not enough people in the European labor market. There is a global race for talent in that sense. Like this is not unique from Croatia, and this is not unique from the EU. We are competing in this sense against each other, so we need to also be aware that we need to set up the right conditions in the EU labor market so that we are attractive as a place where to come to work. Yeah, like this will come back like again in the presentation. Then, like the speed of the transformation is very fast, and sometimes traditional education and training systems struggle to adapt to the needs of this society and of this labor market, right? So this is also a place where micro-credentials can step in. And finally, and this is also very challenging, is that when it comes to education and training, the stakeholders are very diverse, the governance is fragmented in so many layers, so it is not always easy to standardize where to go. Well, actually the word standardization is no way, right? And maybe that's not the goal, but like to bring in some harmony, some understanding is very, very difficult, or like simply coordination is very, very difficult in this realm. So this is where like the EU considers there is a gap and a need for this union of skills. So just very quickly, it has like 4 parts, like a first one on building skills, on upskill and reskill for the green and digital transitions. This third part is very interesting, that is on circulating skills, so really creating a single market for skills, that there is a part where the internal market of the EU has potential to be better consolidated, right? That when I get like something that's certified, my skill, for example, a micro-credential or a qualification in Croatia, for example, then I can go to Spain and this information is equally understood and valid, and there is no this asymmetric information in something that should be a unified single market, right? An internal market. So this part is very key. There will be an initiative called a Skills Portability Initiative, and I invite you to follow it because it also will be very much related to micro-credentials. But this is, of course, an ongoing work. But voila. And then finally, like the part that has to do with the demographic taint. Like there is a part of the Union of Skills that is related to attracting people from third countries other than the EU, because we don't have enough workforce. And I remember now the data I wanted to bring is that from now to 2050, the EU internal market, like the EU labor market, is losing 1 million people per year. So every year there is 1 million workers less in the EU labor market. Like it is massive, right? So there is an effort for upskilling and reskilling, but also an effort for attracting people into the EU labor market. Okay, so now let's go to our business on micro-credentials. I thought it was still important to have this introduction, right? Because it's fully linked. So what is in the Union of Skills related to micro-credentials? So basically this very bold statement that says, we want to expand the use of micro-credentials, indeed, as flexible learning solutions, as we said that there is this need, right? In line with the European approach, and that's why I keep presenting the European approach, because it's still our main policy document, right? Our main guideline, to ensure that micro-credentials are trusted, are understandable, are issued digitally, which will make it easy, like this portability, right? This circulation of skills, and that they are comparable and understandable, not only across countries, but also across sectors. So that's a bit like the idea of micro-credentials in this Union of Skills. But I would say, in a way, is after 3 years, nothing new, but bolder. You know, like not necessarily like new on what do we want, but we really keep wanting it. Like that's a bit the message. And here, I've prepared some slides to set up like the mood for the discussion, right? So I raised a question, like what is the point of micro-credentials? To boost lifelong learning, as we said, right? We want to create a mindset of upskilling and reskilling. So however you acquire these new skills, but acquire them, right? So then maybe we don't need to over-regulate the way in which we issue micro-credentials, right? Like it is enough with people having learning and training opportunities, however they happen, like informally, in non-formal learning contexts, like in companies, in their families, like however that happened on the internet with a YouTube video, right? And then it's enough, like we want people to learn. But maybe also we want to facilitate the way in which these skills are signaled and understood across the EU. And then is where the credential part of the micro-credential makes sense, right? It's like still is not only about upskilling and reskilling, but it's also about giving people and companies and every stakeholder in the labor market, let's say, right? But anyone who needs to understand the skills that we have, what it is, right? And how does it compare to qualifications and so on and so forth. So these two parts are very important to bear in mind every time that we said, what is our problems and how do we find solutions, right? Because to some extent, it doesn't need to be one against the other, but one can see a little bit of a trade-off in between how easy or how much we want to boost this upskilling and reskilling while keeping it, of course, accessible and like with quality, right? But also how much do we want to step in my case, for example, as a public administration, to put order in the way that then we display this set of skills that we have acquired anyhow. So that on the one hand, and then also for setting a bit the discussion, this part we all know, right? I want to go here, like what is micro-credentials, what is the point, they are target, relevant, flexible, small and short in duration so that they can adapt and can be flexible for people and because they will be, for example, raising up their families in the meantime, working in the meantime, and still we are asking people to upskill and reskill. But maybe here, like this part is also useful to keep in mind because there is, as we said, so many stakeholders in this whole thing of micro-credentials. So on the one hand, we have employers that need a skilled workforce, right? So it is in their best interest to have people with the right skills. So then maybe the pressure is so high and sometimes traditional education and training providers cannot keep up to the speed of these skills need, that employers themselves become training providers, right? But then maybe the issue is that for employers, it's not especially interest that the micro-credential is owned by the learner, right? Because for them it's enough that the worker has the skills. So this is happening a lot, like in the labor market, companies are developing their small training courses, issuing eventually, let's say, unorganized micro-credentials, but that are not so useful for the learners because then they cannot go away and have them portable and go with them around. Then we have, for example, from the side of like learners and workers, so to speak, that we are all asking, all of us, right, to upskill and reskill, but sometimes maybe we do not work much on what are the barriers and what are the incentives for these learners, because in the end, like upskilling and reskilling takes at least time, if not also money, which can be solved, for example, with ILAs, right, and with voucher systems, but it still is not for free. It takes time, and we always talk about the three main barriers for adult learning, for reaching this 60% of adult in education and training, is, in a very simplified way, money, time, and motivation. So how can we solve the issue of money? But also, how can we solve the issue of time, right? And whether there is some people who might be lagged behind because their time availability is not as big as other people, but also motivation, right? Like it's really this training and investment for us. For me, it will eventually pay off. Are we making sure that this will indeed pay off as we say it will, right? So that's very important to consider. From the side of education and training providers as well, we cannot talk about a single group, right? Like we have like the traditional education and training providers, for example, vet centers, higher education institutions, who realize maybe that, okay, there is a whole market of adult education that we need to tap in, and the way to go about it is like by adapting our curriculum or like complementing our curriculum with micro-credentials. But as I said, it is also a training provider, private training providers who are completely out of this formal system, that they don't know about quality assurance mechanisms, they don't know about accreditation processes, they don't know about all that. But for example, they know exactly what the market needs because they are the market, for example. But then the issue is that it is not organized, right? So I just wanted, and then there is governments, and governments are as like many levels, right? So I came from the European Union, right, from the European Commission, and education and training is not a competence of the European Union. It's at a member state level in the best cases, and if not, at regional levels, right? So just to explain a little bit the complexity of the issue, like to set the ground and to see like from where everybody can have a part and where do we want to go together. And I thought this slide, even though it seems quite simple, it could be interesting to introduce this discussion on like the many different interests and the many different angles from where we can go towards this 60% of adults in training every year, and that it's like fruitful for society, for competitiveness, for leaving no one behind, and for people to have quality jobs and to be ready for the labor market and for society. So the council recommendation, exactly based on that, it was the rationale somehow for the European Union to come up 3 years ago, like in June 2022, with a council recommendation on a European approach to micro-credentials for lifelong learning and employability. So this is a bit what I explained, right? Like there is the education part, like this lifelong learning, but also there is this employment part, and that's why I'm working in DG Employment at the European Commission with this file. And it is a council recommendation, which I guess like you are all well aware, but just in case I can explain a bit. Basically, this is a non-binding instrument of the EU. That means it's not compulsory for member states to comply with that, because the EU doesn't have competences. But still, it is an effort of coordination, because this, in the Council, every member state is represented, so it means that every member state has sit down around a table and has accepted this document, right? And has said, I do agree with what is written, and I will implement it. Like EU cannot go after, and do like infringement and enforcement procedures to make sure that that every country, every member state comply with that. But it's still, like, it is a big step that deals with the legal basis that we have, but that still is a big step because it has been negotiated by every member state. So it is not the Commission who has said this. It is actually member states who have said, hey, let's adopt all together this European approach. And there is some benefits on this European approach. So what is this European approach? Like the rationale indeed is, as I explained, right? Like to boost, well, I didn't explain it actually, so I will. So the idea is that, right, is that we observed that there is so many micro-credentials that we are talking about such, that it has such a broad scope, this world, that we are regulating over so many different things and so many different stakeholders, that we needed to step in to propose a common approach, so to put some order in this whole hassle somehow, to boost the quality of micro-credentials, because it is an issue, right, like as you were like rightly describing, to boost the trust, like what is this and what does it mean and how does it relate to a qualification and whatnot, and also to boost the uptake so that more people engage in lifelong learning and take micro-credentials. And the whole idea is to make them more comparable and more understandable across sector and across countries, like across the EU. So this is the overview of the Council recommendation. It has 3 building blocks, like it proposed a common definition already, because as we will see, that's not so clear. And still we keep going to conferences and whatnot, and the first question is like, what is a micro-credential, right? So now we can say, the EU agreed that a micro-credential is one thing, that we will look at it later, right? And it's not something else. So this already like put some order. Then it proposes standard elements to define a micro-credential, and I will also explain this later and see at which point we are now. And it proposes also principles for the design and issuance of micro-credentials. And the whole idea is that everybody in the EU follow a bit these standards. And actually, I would add something else, that is that what is interesting about this, that looks like in a way very technical or very administrative, is that when you have like a strong administrative capacity to set up standards, the one who is proactive in doing that sets a little bit the standards for the rest of the world, right? So that if we manage to be good at the EU doing that, it is already happening, that other stakeholders elsewhere than in the EU is following, is coming after and saying like, okay, to propose something else, why not? We join that so that we can keep in the conversation beyond the EU. And this is a super interesting part of this policy document that looks in principle like just maybe too technical, right? That it has this potential. Then there is like some areas of action, like the creation of ecosystems, like for example, including micro-credentials in national qualification frameworks and refer them to EQF, creating national or even European registries of micro-credentials, then deliver on the potential of micro-credentials and what is the Commission support for that I will go later as well. And as I said, like that the focus of the Council recommendation is not only on education, training and skills policies, but also on active labor market policies. And that was very well introduced, so it was like great to have the Croatian case study to be more concrete about what do we mean in the EU by that, right? Okay, so going by each of the building blocks, it is a bit of a pity because we are working now on a report measuring this, like mapping the state of implementation of this Council recommendation 3 years later. And it could have been that it was already published by now, but it's not, like it is in the publishing process. So I cannot present it as such because it's not yet public, but I invite you very much to read it. And what I can do is I just drop some of the hints or some of the insights that we get out of this report, right? So for example, with the common definition that is established in the EU approach to micro-credentials, what that it says, that a micro-credential is the record of the learning outcome. So it's already saying a lot. That is, that the micro-credential needs to be expressed in terms of the learning outcome. And also says something else, that many times the micro-credential is mixed, like we use it indistinctively to refer to the training program that leads to a micro-credential, or to the certification, to the micro-credential itself. So the EU is already saying, it is the record of the learning outcome. Like micro-credential, we talk about the credential. So what is important is not only to upskill and reskill, but also to come up with a way to display the learning outcome that I got with this training experience. And actually, the Council recommendation also embraces informal and non-formal learning settings. So micro-credentials can also be used for like proving this, or like assessing these informal and non-formal learning experiences. Then it is a small volume of learning, and this is the words that were negotiated, and they are important, right? It is not expressed, it is not quantified. It doesn't say how big the micro-credential can be. And this is on purpose, right? Because as I said, it's so big what we are trying to put order in that we need to be inclusive with this small, right? So, okay, we agreed, member states agreed that it's small, but it's not being determined. And one of the things that has happened while seeing the state of implementation of the Council recommendation is that some countries, some member states in their regulation has set up credit limits, for example, and they have expressed it in terms of ECTS. And they said the Council, like a micro-credential is between 3 and 30 ECTS. Invented example, right, with the data. What is the problem with that? That then what does it mean? That if it's a micro-credential in this member state and I come from micro-credential from other member state, then you won't recognize it. If it is a micro-credential that is not expressed in terms of ECTS, then you won't recognize it. Also, in which context will you recognize it? So that's why, like, over-regulating in a way is a barrier for portability. Well, at the same time, you need some order for they to move. So just this is one of the insights that we got while taking the definitions that member states have implemented, being more or less consistent with the EU proposed definition. Then, as you know, they need to be assessed, they need to be owned by the learner, so this is also the interesting part, right? Like okay, you get a course in a company, but like for being considered a micro-credential, and if a company wants to have their micro-credential like accepted or publicly accepted, then it's like make sure that the owner can like own it, share it, like bring it somewhere else. It can be a standalone or combined, and this is the whole concept of stackability. And they have to be underpinned by quality assurance. And I know that you are experts on that, so I want to insist. Then with the standard elements, the same. I know you know very much, but my comment regarding that is like, in the end, I think that this Annex 2 of the Council recommendation is a transparency tool, right? Okay, so we cannot be more prescriptive, we cannot be more specific on how to describe these standard elements, but what the Council recommendation says is like, please describe them. Like make sure that you tell me what is a notional workload is. When you can use instruments that already exist, for example, the ECTS system, please use it. But if you can't, don't worry. Tell me the notional workload, somehow else, but tell me. You see, so that we can start at least speaking a common language or to share it. So this regarding the standard elements. And regarding the principles for design and issuance of micro-credentials, I will just focus maybe on the one that they should be learner-centered, exactly because of what we were commenting, right? Is like, if we really want to create incentives for people to engage in lifelong learning, we do need to consider their needs and their challenges. And many times we might forget about that, and therefore the uptake is not as high as desirable. So that's an important part. And here, to present the ongoing work on micro-credentials, this is the report that I said that is about to be published, so I invite you very much to follow it up, because it is about to be published. Like in a couple of weeks, it should be out. And it has a lot of insights, not only from a quantitative perspective, to see, for example, percentages of countries who has already adopted the recommendation, like a definition, or percentage of countries who have a registry, or who has introduced ILAS system, like individual learning account systems. But also, there is a lot of like qualitative examples, like a qualitative information on good practices that can be very useful to keep in mind. Then we are working on a new webpage on micro-credentials because we realize that there is still some margin to better communicate this council recommendation and what is the point about it. And then we are putting a lot of funding. There is like Erasmus Plus ongoing projects, both looking forward projects and policy experimentations, specifically on micro-credentials, so also like letting room for this innovation that is more bottom-up, right? Like to see what it comes out of like these associations and partnerships. And we are doing peer learning activities, and we said peer because we work here with member states, and what we create is like safe spaces so that member states can share their practices. Actually, in the latest one we had in May last year, Croatia was one of the speakers that were presenting their voucher system. And the next one we have is in May this year, and it's specifically on the role that engaging with the stakeholders has for development of micro-credentials. Here there is some useful tools that the EU has also, like the European Commission has also developed, and I know you are well aware. And I will just mention them here to say, anytime we can use them, let's please use them, right? Because the whole thing is that this will allow us to be interoperable, to speak a common language, and so, but I won't explain them now because I have no time, and I know you might be more experts than I am. And then the last part of the presentation, right? Like, what else is needed? And this is like the last slide that I think I would like to close here my presentation with some points to consider. So first of all, that the EU has it crystal clear that qualifications are still needed. Like there is some foundational knowledge we cannot skip, right? But like how micro-credentials can complement this foundational knowledge, right? Can be like a top-up or an entry point, for example, or a way to facilitate completion of a qualification in case of stackability. This is something to explore, and maybe like more is needed in that regard. To consider skills not as a cost, but as an investment, so it will have a return, it will pay off, and that's also something very important, like a very important message. Then what we discussed, right, that education and training policies are very much divided at a governmental level, which make it especially challenging to work on that, and that we need to strive a balance in between clarity of the guidance and flexibility, so that we do not kill the original beauty of micro-credentials, that is that they are flexible and agile and responsive and they adapt. So that's it on my side, and I'm very happy to get any question in case there are time or like, anything I might help you with. Thank you very much.